Hey everybody, how's it going? I am getting ready to do a study stream on the history of philosophy. We've been going through the presocratics the past couple of streams. I was planning on doing Heraclitus and Parmenides on this stream, but I am currently working on a proper video, a proper upload for YouTube on how to start studying philosophy. And I really need to do a little bit of writing on the script. And part of what I need to do for this script is to characterize some of the major periods of philosophy. So I'm going to spend at least the first part of the stream, maybe most of the stream, depending on how it goes, sort of working through the different periods of philosophy. One moment here. Okay, so do you like my drum machine? I hope you do. All right, I've got a lot of tabs to figure out here. Let's have a little message. We're studying philosophy. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get my windows arranged here. In the chat, how you doing? What's going on today? Let me know. All right. Got obsidian. All right. I have way more. I have way more tabs open than I expected. But that's how it goes sometimes, I guess, huh? All right. So I've got. I pulled up Copleston. I think this will be a good place to start. My plan here is to go over the pre-Socratic period, the classical period, the Hellenistic period, the medieval period, the Renaissance period, the early modern period, the late modern period, and the contemporary period of philosophy. I'm not trying to get super exhaustive about about summarizing these, but I am just trying to get a basic gist. Like what basically I want to have maybe just a paragraph or two for each one about the level I would give as an overview in like an undergraduate class, like the lecture before I assign a reading. So I really don't want this. So this is going to be a section in a video I'm working on right now, and I really don't want this section to be more than like 10 minutes. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So a little over maybe 1 minute of content per period here. I'm just curious. So they're saying on the Google that you speak around 120 to 150 words per minute. So essentially, I'm going to want about 150 words for each one of these periods. Now, I'll be honest with you. I know a good bit about the presocratic period. I know a good bit about the classical and Hellenistic period. I'm okay on the medieval period, which is funny because I have a education from a Catholic university, and medieval philosophy is not my strong suit necessarily. I don't know much about the Renaissance period. Early modern, I'm iffy on. Late modern and contemporary is more where I hang out most of the time. So these will be a little easier. But my thinking for this stream is why don't we just go in order? Why don't we just go in order the um, through the periods here? Okay. Let's take a look at volume 1 here, which is going to be so Copleston starts in Ionia. He talks about Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Parmenides, Zeno, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, the atomists, pre-Socratic philosophy. I don't need to necessarily go into detail on most of these thinkers, so why don't we take a look at pre-Socratic philosophy? That's on page 76. How long is this? Not too bad. Let's take a look. So, it is often said that Greek philosophy centers around the problem of the one and the many. Already in the very earliest stages of Greek philosophy, we find the notion of unity. Things change into one another, therefore there must be some common substratum, some ultimate principle, some unity underlying diversity. So let's go ahead and note that. This is going to be from Copleston 1, page 76. Why don't we just go ahead and cite this whole chapter, chapter 11. It's going to be 76 through 86. So we have the one and the many, a common substratum that I guess underlies changing phenomena, an ultimate principle. And we will clean this up after we finish taking notes. I'm just giving you a little insight into how I sort of assemble research here. We're going to take rough notes from this chapter and then clean it up into something a little more presentable. Although Thales declared it water, Anaximenes air, Heraclitus fire, they chose different principles, but all three believed in one ultimate principle. But although the fact of change, what Aristotle called substantial change, may have suggested to the early cosmologists the notion of an underlying unity in the universe, it would be a mistake to reduce this notion to a conclusion of physical science. Okay. On the notion of underlying unity cannot be reduced to physical science. Very good so far. As far as strict scientific proof goes, they had not sufficient data to warrant their assertion of unity, still less to warrant the assertion of any particular ultimate principle, whether water, fire, or air. The fact is that early cosmologists leapt beyond the data to the intuition of universal unity. They possessed what we might call the power of metaphysical intuition. So we'll say they used metaphysical intuition. This is per Copleston. This constitutes their glory and their claim to a place in the history of philosophy. If Thales had contented himself with saying that out of water earth has evolved, we should, as Nietzsche observes, only have a scientific hypothesis, a false one, though nevertheless difficult to refute. But Thales went beyond a mere scientific hypothesis. He reached out to a metaphysical doctrine expressed in the metaphysical doctrine that everything is one. Okay, he's quoting Nietzsche again. Greek philosophy seems to begin with fancy, that the proposition that water is the origin and mother womb of all things. Is it really necessary to stop there and become serious? Yes, for three reasons. Firstly, because the proposition does enunciate something about the origin of things. Second, because it does so without figure and fable. Third and last, because in it is contained, although only in a chrysalis state, the idea everything is one. The first mentioned reason leaves Thales still in the company of religious and superstitious people. The second reason, which we said it does so without figure and fable. Second reason takes him out of this company and shows him to us as a natural philosopher. By virtue of third, Thales becomes the first Greek philosopher. And the third here is that in it is contained the idea that everything is one. So everything is one. See Nietzsche. What was this reference here? Philosophy during the tragic age of the Greeks, section 3. Okay, so in the presocratics we get a search for an ultimate principle, a search for an explanation of the unity of the universe. All right, very good. Let's skim along here. Though the early cosmologists were inspired by the idea of cosmic unity, they were faced by the fact of the many, of multiplicity, diversity. They had to attempt the theoretical reconciliation. Don't know if we need to get into all this. Parmenides, in the grip of his great theory that being is one and changeless, denied the facts of change and motion. So I think the summary here we can say is that because they focused on the unity of things, they had to deal with change in various, they had to theorize change. Change was a problem for them. According to Copleston, the presocratics grappled with the problem of the one and the many, but failed to solve it, handing it instead to Plato and Aristotle. All right. This is a pretty good start, I think. If the problem of the one and the many continued to exercise Greek philosophy in the post-Socratic period and received much more satisfactory salutations in the hands of Plato and Aristotle, it is obvious that we cannot characterize pre-Socratic philosophy by reference to that problem. We require some other note of characterization and distinction. Good, okay, great. Where is it to be found? What we may say that pre-Socratic philosophy centers around the external world, the object, the not self. Man, the subject, the self, is of course not excluded from consideration, but the interest in the not self is predominant. So, in pre-Socratic philosophy, we'll say pre-Socratic philosophy centers primarily on the external world. This can be seen from the question which the successive pre-Socratic thinkers set themselves to answer: of what is the world ultimately composed? All right, so this will be, we'll do a direct quote from Copleston 78. Of what is the world ultimately composed? In their answers to this question, the early Ionian philosophers went beyond what the empirical data warranted, but, as already remarked, they tackled the question in a philosophic spirit and not in the spirit of weavers of mythological fancies. They had not differentiated between physical science and philosophy, and combined scientific observations of a purely practical character with philosophic speculations. But it must be remembered that a differentiation between physical science and philosophy was hardly possible at that early stage. Another important fact here, that science and philosophy are not yet differentiated. I'm going to set my timer. If you were on any previous streams, you know we covered this point from quite a few different times. All right. Since they were, let's see. Since they were concerned with the ultimate nature of the world, their theories rank as philosophical. But since they had not yet formed any clear distinction between spirit and matter, and since their question was largely prompted by the fact of material change, their answer was couched for the most part in terms and concepts taken from matter. That's a nice little way to put it, I guess. They found the ultimate stuff of the universe to be some kind of matter, whether the water of Thales, the indeterminate of Anaximander. This is what we call the apeiron. The Greek is apeiron here, and it's translated as the infinite or the boundless, right? The indeterminate is nice, actually. I like this rendering of that word. The air of Axiomenes, the fire of Heraclitus, the atoms of Leucippus, and so a large part of their subject matter would be claimed by physical scientists of today as belonging to their province. Okay, let's take a look at this here. Again, their theories rank, so they're concerned with ultimate questions. They were concerned with the ultimate nature of the world. So we'll say they questioned the ultimate nature of reality, and they answered in material terms. And we know we've got Thales, water, what do we say here? So this is where I think Anaximander, again, we talked about this yesterday, but Anaximander is like a little more sophisticated because this notion of a pyrrhon, the infinite, the indeterminate, isn't strictly a material concept, right? Water, fire, air, all of these are sort of elemental material concepts, but the apeiron is quite different. Again, we're not going to need to go into this for the video I'm working on, but it's just worth noting here on the stream. Let me know if the volume is okay. I've changed my setup a little bit so that when I'm typing around on the keyboard, it doesn't sound like I'm hitting you in the head. The early Greek philosophers are then rightly called cosmologists because they were concerned with the nature of the cosmos. Man himself is considered in his objective aspect as one item in the cosmos rather than in his subjective aspect, as the subject of knowledge or as the morally willing and acting subject. In their consideration of the cosmos, they did not reach any final conclusion, accounting for all the factors involved in this apparent bankruptcy of cosmology, together with other causes to be considered presently, naturally led to a swing-over of interest from object to subject, from the cosmos to man himself. This change of interest, as exemplified in the Sophists, we will consider in the following section of this book. I think Copleston's a little harsh on the presocratics, maybe, but that's okay. We'll say they're concerned with the object rather than the subject, with the cosmos rather than the knower. Again, this is just supposed to be a very general overview that will sort of get people ready to read in whatever period they're looking at. It's not supposed to be exhaustive. It's just supposed to be enough to get you oriented. Presocratic philosophy centers around the cosmos, the external world, and that this cosmological... So I've got a chat that says history stuff. What's the name of this book? Yeah, so this is A History of Philosophy by Frederick Copleston. This is available on Internet Archive. It is like the source for a history of philosophy. So yeah, if you just go look up Frederick Copleston, you can see down at the bottom of the screen there. If you look up Frederick Copleston on Internet Archive, you'll find all. They have 9 volumes. I've seen it split up into 11 volumes other places, but they have 9, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is like considered like the go-to history of philosophy. And I haven't read a ton of it. I've read parts, but I haven't read a ton of it. I would like to read all of it cover to cover one day. Although it's true that pre-Socratic philosophy centers around the cosmos, that this cosmological interest is the distinguishing mark of pre-Socratic as contrasted with Socratic philosophy, it must also be remarked that one problem, at any rate, connecting with man as the knowing subject was raised in pre-Socratic philosophy, that of the relation between sense experience and reason. Parmenides, yes, starting with the notion of the one, finding himself unable to explain coming to be and passing away, which are given in sense experience, set aside the evidence of the senses as illusion, and proclaimed the sole validity of reason, which alone is able to attain the real and the abiding. This is a very interesting distinction. So Parmenides, famously said that all change is an illusion, and so the senses have to be kind of illusory as well. I'm going to skip over this for the purposes of this video I'm planning here, but it is an interesting sort of caveat to this characterization of pre-Socratic philosophy. Since the early Greek thinkers may justly be termed philosophers, and since they proceed largely by way of action and reaction, thesis and antithesis, Heraclitus overemphasizing becoming and Parmenides overstressing being, this is the Heraclitus-Parmenides debate that I was planning to cover today, but we'll get to it next time. It was only to be expected that the germs of later philosophical tendencies and schools were already discernible in pre-Socratic philosophy. Yes. So the germs of later philosophical schools, philosophical tendencies in schools, schools with a capital S, would already be discernible in pre-Socratic philosophy. Okay. And that is going to be on page 79. Since that's a direct quote, I'll probably end up quoting Copleston in this thing. Pre-Socratic philosophy is not simply a pre-philosophic stage which can be discounted in the study of Greek thought, so that we should be justified in starting immediately with Socrates and Plato. The pre-Socratic philosophy is not a pre-philosophical stage, but is the first stage of Greek philosophy. It may not be pure and unmixed philosophy, but it is philosophy, and it deserves to be studied for the sake of its own intrinsic interest as the first Greek attempt to attain a rational understanding of the world. So we'll say this is the first Greek attempt to attain a rational understanding of the world. And this is page 80. All right. I think that's good enough. We will, for now, we will go ahead and I'm going to make this a say I don't want to devote an entire section to Socratic and sophistic philosophy. Maybe I should, though. I mean, it's really, really important. We'll see how far we get. Dude, what's your thought on Western philosophy like liberalism? Dude, liberalism is destroying America. As a non-American, I believe this is true. My English is bad. Um, I do not agree with you. It would be pretty. It would take a while, I think, to go down that rabbit hole. But no, I don't agree. Um, what's happening in the states right now and in the world in general is a reactionary period. So, I mean, there it depends on what you mean by liberalism, I guess, and that would be a discussion for a different stream, I think. But thank you for your question. Okay, Socratic and sophistic philosophy. So we have the sophists. Let's go back to the um, table of contents and see what might be the best place to go next. So part 2 is the sophists, Socrates. Could you explain boot camp med school nephrology? No, I can't. Nope. I have no idea what you're talking about. So 81 to 87 looks like it'll be worth a skim, and then we'll go to 96. The earlier Greek philosophies had been interested in the object, trying to determine the ultimate principle of all things. Their success, however, did not equal their philosophic sincerity, and the successive hypotheses that they advanced easily led to a certain skepticism. Okay. So we'll say we have Copleston. I always misspell his name. Sorry. Copleston writes that the many hypotheses of the pre-Socratics inevitably led to skepticism. This is on page 81. Is the possibility of attaining any certain knowledge concerning the ultimate nature of the world. Add to this that the doctrines such as those of Heraclitus and Parmenides would naturally result in a skeptical attitude in regard to the validity of sense perception. If being is static and the perception of movement is an illusion, or if, on the other hand, all is in a state of constant change and there is no real principle of stability, our sense perception is untrustworthy, and so the very foundations of cosmology are undermined. The systems of philosophy hitherto proposed exclude one another. We could say, yes, the proposed systems are mutually exclusive. That's a good point. And even the validity of sense perception was called into question by thinkers like Parmenides. But no philosopher had yet risen of sufficient stature to reconcile the antithesis in a higher synthesis, which, by the way, if you're hearing Hegel, yes, that's correct. I feel like this is very Hegelian language. Even though Hegel never used those exact words. In which error should be purged away and justice done to the truth contained in rival doctrines. The result was bound to be a certain mistrust of cosmologies. And indeed, a swing over to the subject as point of consideration was necessary if real advance was to be made. It was Plato's consideration of thought that made possible a truer theory in which justice should be done to the facts of both stability and mutability, but the reaction from object to subject, which made possible the advance, first appears among the sophists and was largely an effect of the bankruptcy of older Greek philosophy. Okay. So we'll say the sophists react to the various incongruous cosmologies of the presocratics by emphasizing the subject. And when he's saying subject here, it's just like sort of subject-object. So in other words, a subject is like a thinking, perceiving being like yourself. You are a subject in some sense. Reality appears for you. And then the object is a thing in experience that you are sort of thinking about or observing or perceiving, right? So he's saying that the pre-Socratics began by speculating about the object of the world, the external world, and because these different speculations were sort of at odds with each other, there was skepticism about the possibility of ever finding an underlying unity to the cosmos, and then sort of theory turned away from speculating about the object, the external world, and started speculating about the subject, or started theorizing about the subject, and that's where we get the sophists. In face of the dialectic of Zeno, so Zeno's paradox here is interesting. We might be able to get to it at some point. It might well appear doubtful if advance in the study of cosmology was really possible. Another factor besides the skepticism consequent on the former Greek philosophy, which directed attention to the subject, was the growing reflection on the phenomena of culture and civilization, due in large part to extended acquaintance on the part of the Greeks with foreign peoples. Not only did they know something of the civilizations of Persia, Babylon, and Egypt, but they had also come into contact with people of a much less advanced stage, such as the Scythians and Thracians. Are the various national and local ways of life, religious, ethical codes merely conventions or not? Was Hellenic culture, as contrasted with non-Hellenic or barbarian cultures, a matter of a matter of nomos? Oh, shoot. A matter of nomos, man-made, immutable, existing, or did it rest on nature? Phusis. Phusei. My Greek's not great. Was it a sacred ordinance having divine sanction, or could it be changed, modified, and developed? Professor Zeller points out in this connection how Protagoras, most gifted of the sophists, came to Abdera, an advanced outpost of Ionic culture in the land of the Thracian barbarian. I think the emphasis here on law and civilization is interesting. So we'll say the question about whether laws were mere conventions or were rather Were they mere conventions, or were they grounded in nature, let's say? Okay. Sophism differed from older Greek philosophy in regard to the matter with which it dealt, namely man and the civilization and the matter with which it dealt, man, civilization, and customs. It treated of the microcosm rather than the macrocosm. Man was becoming self-conscious, as Sophocles says. So we'll say the human being law and civilization and a changed method. Although the method of the older Greek philosophy by no means excluded empirical observation, it was characteristically deductive. When a philosopher had settled on his general principle of the world, its ultimate constituent principle, it then remained to explain particular phenomena in accordance with that theory. The sophists sought to amass a wide store of particular observations and facts. They were encyclopedists and polymaths. Then, from these accumulated facts, they proceeded to draw conclusions, partly theoretical, partly practical. Thus, from the store of facts they accumulated concerning differences of opinion and belief, they might draw the conclusion that it is impossible to have any certain knowledge, or from their knowledge of various nations and ways of life, they might form a theory as to the origin of civilization or the beginning of language. So they began, I guess, with the particular and moved to the universal. And we could say universal skepticism or otherwise. We'll skip around a little bit. Hey, we got a break coming up, but I'm going to finish the sophists real fast. The sophists profess to teach, I guess, politicians how to speak well, training them in the chief expression of political virtue, the virtue of the new aristocracy of intellect and ability. There was, of course, nothing wrong in this in itself, but the obvious consequence that the art of rhetoric might be used to get across a notion or policy which was not disinterested or might be definitely harmful to the city, or merely calculated to promote the politician's career, helped to bring the sophists into bad repute. This was particularly the case with regard to their teaching of heuristic. If a man wanted to make money in the Greek democracy, it had to be done mainly by lawsuits, and the sophists professed to teach the right way of winning these lawsuits. But clearly that might easily mean, in practice, the art of teaching men how to make the unjust appear the just cause. Such a procedure was obviously very different from the procedure of the old truth-seeking attitude of the philosophers, and helps to explain the treatment meted out to the sophists at the hands of Plato. Yeah, Plato was not a fan of sophists, and neither was Socrates, and this is the reason. So let's see if we can sum this up real quick. Sophists taught rhetoric, which could be used to win lawsuits. The focus was on rhetorical effectiveness and not on truth-seeking. A politician could use rhetoric learned from the sophists to uh, what would we say to mm, let's see, very different from the procedural. Okay, not in truth seeking. In order to win lawsuits, the rhetorician could make the unjust appear just. This gained the sophists a bad reputation. Again, we'll clean this up in a few minutes. And we will cite page 84 here. I am using Obsidian. The program I'm using is Obsidian. This particular note, I'm just kind of using, I'm just taking notes in this particular one, but Obsidian's really cool because you can basically make a graph. So what I'm doing with, you can sort of connect all of your notes together into a graph. So what I'm doing currently in this streaming series is just kind of going through the history of Western philosophy and just kind of building a graph. And as we keep going, it'll sort of get more and more complex, and you'll be able to see more and more connections and things, and where different things sort of cluster up and stuff like that. So it's very cool. It's a very cool program. Obsidian, totally free. Highly recommend it. Okay, so we are at a break. I'm going to maybe, I'm going to cheat a little bit and put Socrates in the classical period, even though technically he didn't write anything, but most of what we know about Socrates comes from Plato. So I am going to put Socrates here. But in the meantime, I'm going to take a quick break. I got to move my body around. I'm not one of those streamers that can sit for 8 hours without moving. So I will give you some drum music. You all can go, grab a drink, stretch out, use the bathroom, walk outside, whatever you got to do. And I will be back in 5 minutes, and we will get into the classical period. Okay, so don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Um, we got another minute here on the break. How are you all doing? Appreciate everybody in the chat. Let's go ahead and start our next sprint. And we will get into the classical period. I don't think we need to look too much at the individual sophists. Um, again, we're doing a high level overview here. But I think it is important. Let's check this conclusion. In conclusion, I may observe again that there is no reason for ascribing to great sophists the intention of overthrowing religion and morality. Men like Protagoras and Gorgias had no such end in view. Indeed, the great sophists favored the conception of a natural law, tended to broaden the outlook of the ordinary Greek citizen. They were an educative force in Hellas. At the same time, it is true that in a certain sense every opinion is true according to Protagoras, every opinion is false according to Gorgias. This tendency to deny the absolute objective character of truth easily leads to the consequence that instead of trying to convince anyone, the sophist will try to persuade him or talk over him. Hey, good to see you again. Indeed, in the hands of lesser men, sophism soon acquired an unpleasant connotation, that of sophistry. While one can only respect the cosmopolitanism and broad outlook of an Antiphon of Athens, one can only condemn the might is right theory of a Thrasymachus on the one hand, and the hair-splitting and quibbling of a Dionysiodorus on the other. The great sophists, as we have said, were an educative force in Hellas, but one of the chief factors in Greek education which they fostered was rhetoric, and rhetoric has its obvious dangers, inasmuch as the orator might easily tend to pay more attention to the rhetorical presentation of the subject than to the subject itself. Moreover, by questioning the absolute foundations of traditional institutions, beliefs, and ways of life, sophism tended to foster a relativistic attitude, though the evil latent in sophism lay not so much in the fact that it raised problems as in the fact that it could not offer any satisfactory intellectual solutions to the problems it raised. Against this relativism, Socrates and Plato reacted, endeavoring to establish the sure foundation of true knowledge and ethical judgments. All right, that's a pretty good, I think, conclusion there. So let's actually sophists were educators in rhetoric, and they tended toward a kind of relativism insofar as they pointed out problems but didn't offer any ready-made solutions. Without an overarching ethical framework, rhetoric could be used to make false things seem true, to make unjust things seem just, and to manipulate people with sophistry. And that is kind of a paraphrase of 95. That's a pretty good, I'm satisfied with the notes here so far. So let's move on to Socrates. Let's just look at the subheadings here. We have his early life, We have the problem of Socrates, is the problem of ascertaining exactly what his philosophical teaching was, because he didn't write anything. Plato wrote a lot about Socrates, but Socrates didn't write anything. The philosophical activity of Socrates. What is this? The trial and death of Socrates. I feel like this is going to be important. This book, again, do I have it on me? I do not. Anyways, the five. Here it is. This book right here, the five dialogues. This kind of revolves around Socrates' death. It's a very good set of dialogues. If you're looking for a place to start with philosophy, Plato's Five Dialogues is a really good place to start. Okay. So I don't want to go into that much detail with Socrates. I think he's really important, obviously, but for an overview, I just need to say a couple things, I think. So let's do this. Early life. So we'll say born approximately 470 BC. Well, I don't really need to know what his parents did. Let's go back to the table of contents and see if we can find a quicker. So 96 to 116. So we've got 20 pages of Socrates here. Yeah, I just don't think that's necessary. I'm gonna go to a much less thorough source here. I'm going to go to Wikipedia. I've taught Socrates a bunch of times. I've dealt with a lot of these sources. I just need a refresher. I just want to make sure I'm not, missing something important. Yeah, they're saying sources in the Socratic problem. So we'll say our main sources for understanding Socrates are Xenophon, Aristophanes, and Plato. Socrates himself did not leave behind any writings. Okay, Socrates was born in 470 or 69 BC, stoneworker and midwife respectively, in the Athenian deme of I don't know how to say that. Therefore, he was an Athenian citizen, having been born to a relatively affluent Athenians. He lived close to his father's relatives and inherited, as was customary, part of his father's estate, securing a life reasonably free of financial concerns. His education followed the laws and customs of Athens. So let's look here. Let's just say he was born into relative comfort as an Athenian citizen. He was married twice. And had 3 sons. And served in the Peloponnesian War. That detail is a little more important, I think. Okay. Another incident that reflects Socrates' respect for the law is the arrest of Leon the Salaminian. As Plato describes in his Apology, Socrates and 4 others were summoned to Tholos and told by representatives of the 30 tyrants to arrest Leon for execution. Again, Socrates was the sole abstainer, choosing to risk the tyrant's wrath and retribution rather than participate in what he considered to be a crime. So he respected the law and even risked the wrath of a tyrant by refusing to participate in a, what would we say here? Criminal arrest. Another incident reflects that Socrates' respect for the law. We said that. Okay. Socrates attracted great interest from the Athenian public, and especially the Athenian youth. He was notoriously ugly, having a flat, turned-up nose, bulging eyes, and a large belly. His friends joked about his appearance. Socrates was indifferent to material pleasures, including his own appearance and personal comfort. He neglected personal hygiene, bathed rarely, walked barefoot, and owned only one ragged coat. He moderated his eating, drinking, and sex, although he did not practice full abstention. Although Socrates was attracted to youth, as was common and accepted in ancient Greece, he resisted his passion for young men because, as Plato describes, he was more interested in educating their souls. Socrates did not seek sex from his disciples, as was often the case between older and younger men in Athens. Politically, he did not take sides in the rivalry between democrats and oligarchs. He criticized both. The character of Socrates is exhibited in Apology, Credo, Phaedo, and the Symposium. 3 of these here are in this dialogue book. Concurs with other sources to an extent that gives confidence in Plato's depiction of Socrates in these works as being representative of the real Socrates. Okay. So, he was highly principled. Well, we should say, yeah. He was ugly in appearance. He was moderate in his indulgences. We'll just say he practiced moderation. And he questioned everything and everyone. That's not coming from what we read, that's just coming from my brain. Okay. He was accused of impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, which you can read as you can read in the Apology. We don't need to get into the details too much here, but okay. Socrates could have gotten himself off the hook, but he chose not to. He was put to death by drinking hemlock. It's important to note here that his accusers didn't have a logically consistent case, but that didn't seem to matter. They were intent on getting rid of him. This is interesting too because the fact that Socrates was put to death by essentially a democracy, put to death by vote, is potentially in Plato a evidence that democracy is not a great system of government. Okay, so we'll see. So there's Socrates. Now we need to do Plato. Maybe after we get through some of this, I should probably turn these all into specific notes for the for the graph. So that would be fun to see how that hashes out. Okay, let's go on to Plato. I'm really looking for just a quick summary. Plato and Aristotle are both so they're giants. I mean, they are giants of they're intellectual giants. We could spend weeks and weeks just studying even just a handful of Plato's dialogues. So I'm really just looking for a very, very high level overview. Let's look at 372 here. We have Plato and Aristotle. That might be a nice summary. And then we will get into Hellenism. We're really moving right along. So let's look at 372. Plato and Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle are without a shadow of a doubt not only the two greatest Greek philosophers, but also two of the greatest philosophers the world has ever seen. That is correct. I agree. They had much in common with one another. How should it not be so when Aristotle was for many years a pupil of Plato and began from the Platonic standpoint? But there was also a marked difference of outlook between them, which, if one prescinds from them, the very considerable common element enables one to characterize their respective philosophies as standing to one another in the ancient relation of thesis to antithesis, a thesis and an antithesis which need to be reconciled in a higher synthesis. Here he goes again with the Hegelian dialectic, in the sense that the valuable and true elements in both need to be harmoniously developed in a more complete and adequate system than the single system of either philosopher taken in isolation. Platonism may be characterized by reference to the idea of being in the sense of abiding in steadfast reality, Aristotelianism by reference to the idea of becoming. But if unchanging being is real, so are change and becoming real. And to both aspects of reality must justice be done by any adequate system of philosophy. All right, so he's kind of putting Plato in the being camp, Aristotle in the becoming camp. Okay. Again, these are just heuristics. These are just heuristics. We've got to talk about the theory of the forms with Plato, and we've got to talk about virtue ethics with Aristotle. I'm just writing those down so that we don't forget. Yeah, so he says as much here. To reference Plato as being, Aristotle as becoming, is to be guilty of a generalization which does not, of course, represent the whole truth. Did not Plato treat of becoming? Did he not propound a theory of teleology? It may be asked with justice. Did he not recognize the material world as the sphere of change? And did he not explicitly admit that change or movement, so far as this is involved by the nature of life or a soul, must belong to the sphere of the real? On the other hand, did not Aristotle find a place, and a very important place, for unchanging being? Did he not, even in the changing material world, discover an element of stability or fixity? Did he not declare the sublimest occupation of man is the contemplation of unchanging objects? One cannot but give an affirmative answer to these questions, yet the truth of the generalization is not disposed of, since it refers to what is peculiarly characteristic in each system, to its general tone or flavor, to the general orientation of the philosopher's thought. I will attempt briefly to justify this generalization, or at least indicate the lines along which I should attempt to justify it in detail, did space permit. So this sounds like it's going to be a argument. This sounds like it's going to be an argument about a heuristic, and I don't think we need to get into that much detail here. For just to flag Plato and Aristotle, I don't think we need to get into I don't think we need to get into specific historiography of philosophy here. I don't think we need to be doing that. So let's I'll go ahead and just off the cuff do what I do in class. So let's just keep our sources straight here. I think what would be cool in this video is to go through a couple of points for Plato and Aristotle both, and then maybe at the end, uh, maybe here, we can do um, uh, Plato and Aristotle. Yeah, maybe we can just do a couple of lines after going through Plato and Aristotle. Um, and, even if I just hit the theory of the forms and virtue ethics, that's not enough here. He does logic, virtue ethics, metaphysics. He's almost like proto-empirical. We're talking about Aristotle here. These are just, again, general thoughts in my brain. We could say he's... is Plato kind of an idealist, or is he just an idealist? We're going to say he's just an idealist. The theory of the forms, theory of recollection. We'll have to say he's a student of Socrates. In the first, so we'll say we're going to talk about his early period. Student of Socrates, skeptical questioning, dialogues end in aporia, which basically just means an impasse, right? We get somewhere where we can't say anything else. Middle period. He gets metaphysics. He starts doing more metaphysics. No. He begins developing a theory of forms and posits a theory of recollection. So the theory of the forms, for those of you who don't know, who are in the stream, the theory of forms basically is this idea that all things get their intelligibility because they participate in the idea of the thing that they are. So, for example, this big mug that I drink water out of, it is a mug because it participates in the idea of a mug, which is eternal and unchanging. And we can contemplate the eternal and unchanging ideas of things, and that is actually a higher truth than our everyday experiences. Actually, you know what? The allegory of the cave out of the Republic might be a really good overview of these ideas. Now I forget. I can't remember. I think it's the Republic, early, middle, or late. Plato. Okay. So the Republic is generally considered a middle dialogue, so that works here. So when we're doing this video, we could just talk briefly about how he was a student of Socrates, how he engaged in questioning, and how his early dialogues often end in an impasse where nobody knows the answer to whatever question he's asking. In the middle period, he starts to become more metaphysical. We can talk about the allegory of the cave. how Plato begins developing a theory of the forms, posits a theory of recollection. Actually, you know what? I don't know if we need all of this. I don't think we need to go into this much detail. I think we can just I don't think we need to get into the early, middle, late period stuff. I think if we do that he was a student of Socrates, he engaged in questioning, the early dialogues in an aporia, as Plato's authorship progresses, he begins positing more metaphysical theories. We can have the allegory, we can have the theory of the forms, and then the allegory of the cave. And I think that will be enough. Okay. I think we've covered. Actually, I think this is a pretty good skeleton of Plato and Aristotle here. I'll need to fill it out a little bit. We are overdue for a break, so I'm going to go ahead and start our 5 minute break, and I'll put the drum machine on for you all. I'm going to go stretch a little bit, and I'll be back in 5 minutes, so don't go anywhere. And we're back. All right. Any questions so far for the people tuning in? If you're interested in studying philosophy, if you're getting something out of this, feel free to sound off in the chat. I can't tell you about med school like one user was asking earlier, but I can answer questions about philosophy and the study of philosophy if you have any questions. But I appreciate you guys being here and tuning in. I think we're making some pretty good headway with this overview. I think we're making pretty good headway here. For what it's worth, it's going to be the sort of the history of philosophy. When I overview it, I'm usually much more detailed at the front end, and then it kind of gets a little less thorough as we go along. And the reason for that is I think it's like more important, I guess, to have insight into the fundamentals of ancient philosophy, because everything else comes after kind of refers back to ancient philosophy to one degree or another. But again, we're just putting this together for a quick video. I'm supposed to get through everything from the presocratic period to the contemporary period in like 10 minutes. I don't think that's going to happen. Or I'm going to have to really shave it down, I guess. Okay. Let's tighten up Plato and Aristotle a little bit. Let's get this. Actually, you know what? I think this is good enough for now. I'll be able to expand these on my own because I teach Plato and Aristotle so much that I can probably expand this pretty easily myself. So why don't we move on to the Hellenistic period? So we're going to the Hellenistic period can be summed up pretty quickly as long as we're selective about what we're looking at here. So let's bring up Copleston again. And let's look at the table of contents once more. Plato, Aristotle. This calls it post-Aristotelian philosophy. I often hear it. I think most people would call it Hellenistic schools nowadays. So we have Stoicism, Epicureanism, Cynicism. We had a viewer, a chatter yesterday get interested in Cynicism, so I looked up a little bit about Diogenes, and it was fun. Skeptics, the Middle Stoa. We don't need to break up Stoicism into its different parts. Again, for a 10-minute overview in the history of philosophy, we don't need to go into that much detail. Cynics, eclectics, and skeptics, Neo-Pythagoreanism, Middle Platonism, Jewish Hellenistic philosophy, Platonian Neoplatonism, other Neoplatonic schools. I'm going to focus on the ones I know best. So that's going to be Stoicism, Epicureanism, and Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonism is a little weird because it's like extremely speculative in a lot of ways and very mystical. Stoicism and Epicureanism are both kind of like philosophies of how to become happy. They really they follow from Aristotle's virtue ethics in a lot of ways. Or they don't follow from Aristotle's virtue ethics, but they're kind of playing in the same water, you know. Not even sure if that's a real figure of speech. Okay, let's take a look at Stoicism. So we could look at the introduction or the concluding review first. For those of you who are maybe going to college or you're in grad school or something like that, well, if you're in grad school, you probably know what you're doing. If you're in college and you need to read a lot really quickly, it's helpful to sort of read out of order and try to understand the introduction and conclusion and just figure out where you need to be reading. You don't read every single page top to bottom, at least in secondary sources, you know. If you're very closely studying a text, you should read it from top to bottom, but for secondary sources, you can be selective. So let's go to 379. Okay, with the reign of Alexander the Great. So Copleston's grounding this whole movement in the fall of the city-state. So we'll say, yeah, this is nice. This ethical and practical interest is particularly marked in the development of the post-Aristotelian schools in the Roman period. For the Romans were not like the Greeks, speculative and metaphysical thinkers. They were predominantly men of practice. Okay. Hellenistic philosophy tended to emphasize practice. Philosophy was, as Hadot says, a way of life. In here, I'm just referring to Pierre Hadot. He's a great scholar of Hellenistic philosophy. If you're interested in Stoicism, I highly recommend checking out Pierre Hadot. I'll type it here for you. Check that book out if you ever get a chance. I might do a video on this one day. Okay. Philosopher directors. Interesting. Okay, so far he's just kind of continuing to emphasize the practical. So philosophy was quite popular among the cultured classes. Philosophy in the Roman period became more and more part of the regular course of education. And it was in this way that philosophy became a rival to Christianity when the new religion began to lay claim to the allegiance of the empire. Indeed, one may say that philosophy, to a certain extent at least, offered to satisfy the religious needs and aspirations of man. Disbelief in the popular mythology was common, and where this disbelief reigned among the educated classes, those who were not content to live without religion at all had either to attach themselves to one of the many cults that were introduced into the empire from the east, and which were definitely more calculated to satisfy man's spiritual aspirations than the official state religion, which was with its business-like attitude, or to turn to philosophy for the satisfaction of those needs. That's very interesting. So it is that we can discern religious elements in such a predominantly ethical system as Stoicism, while in Neoplatonism, the last flower of ancient philosophy, the syncretism of religion and philosophy reaches its culmination. More than that, we may say that in Platinian Neoplatonism, so that's the Neoplatonism of Plotinus, in which the mystical flight of the spirit or ecstasy is made the final and highest point of intellectual activity, philosophy tends to pass over into religion. Okay. So in Neoplatonism, we have philosophy and religion kind of blended together. Insistence on ethics alone leads to an ideal of spiritual independence and self-sufficiency, such as we find in both Stoicism and Epicureanism. While insistence on religion tends rather to assert dependence on a transcendental principle and to describe the purification of the self to action of the divine, an attitude that we find in a mystery cult like that of Mithras. It is to be noted, however, that both tendencies to insist on the ethical and self-sufficient perfection versus insisting on worshiping the divine contributed to meet the same want, the want of the individual in the Greco-Roman world to find a sure basis for his individual life, since the religious attitude too brought with it a certain independence vis-a-vis the secular empire. In practice, of course, these attitudes tended to coalesce, with the emphasis being placed sometimes on the ethical, sometimes on the religious, while in Neoplatonism there was an attempt at a comprehensive synthesis, the ethical being subordinated to the religious, but without losing its importance. That's an interesting way of looking at it. Copleston really is a Hegelian, isn't he? I love that. So with Stoicism, you have the ethical, obviously emphasizing the ethical and practical. Epicureanism is the same. You are emphasizing the ethical and practical. The difference is in Stoicism, there's the idea that cultivating virtue is sufficient completely for happiness, while in Epicureanism there's an emphasis on pleasure as the highest good in life. But it's not sort of this radical hedonism. It's not like it's not like Wolf of Wall Street kind of stuff. It's Epicurus focused on sort of enjoying moderate pleasures so that you don't have this kind of wild oscillation between pleasure and pain. I actually think this is probably enough for the Hellenistic period. We've been going for an hour and 47. I might need to do a second stream at some point, or I might just need to handle this off of stream later today. I'm starting to get a little tired, and might need to take a break. And the medieval In the medieval paradigm, you have, especially in Europe, right? You have the dominance of the Christian Church, and the motto for philosophy becomes fides quaerens intellectum, faith-seeking understanding. Aristotle becomes an incredibly important, we'll say, an important source for scholastic philosophers like Aquinas. We'll say begins with the conversion of Saint Augustine. Augustine developed his Christian philosophy in conversation with Neoplatonism. And then we'll say Anselm. So this is commonly what's called the A team: Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas. All right. Anselm developed what's called the ontological proof for God's existence. It is a very controversial and complicated. It's not complicated, it's just kind of subtle, the argument. There are libraries and libraries of books and papers written that prove or disprove the ontological argument. We're not going to get into it too much in this video, but it is worth mentioning, I guess, for the viewer. Now we're entering a section of philosophy I really don't know anything about, and that is the Renaissance. I don't know much about Renaissance philosophy. So let's take a look. See what Copleston has to say. So this is the French Enlightenment, so we got to go backwards. It's probably early modern. That's oh, that's right, because it's out of order. It's going to be Descartes. And here, I believe this is going to be the Renaissance. Late medieval and Renaissance, yep. Oh, goodness. They want to get into Occam. The Occamist movement. Science. Revival of Platonism. Yeah, I'm going to need to do this probably off stream. I have too much writing to do on that. Too much research. It would not be fun viewing. So we'll start with Descartes. Spinoza, Leibniz, Hume, Locke, Kant, and for late modern, we'll have Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, Kierkegaard, Marx, or is it Marx, Kierkegaard? Nietzsche. And for contemporary philosophy, we can do... Let's do phenomenology, existentialism, analytic philosophy, post-structuralism, that's probably enough. For contemporary philosophy, I'm probably just going to give like a sentence or two. It's actually far too chaotic to kind of group 20th century philosophy into a couple buckets. Yeah. So we'll say rationalism, and empiricism. Late modern, we've got German idealism, and we'll say post-Hegelian philosophy. And with contemporary philosophy, yeah, we'll just stick to this. I'll probably research around a little bit more, but I think this is a pretty good framework for getting started. I guess so with the Renaissance period, we need to do nominalism, Occam, the scientific method, and is Copernicus, I forget, is Copernicus a Renaissance thinker? Let's look here. Yeah, he was a Renaissance guy. I think Copernicus is a pretty good sort of historical touch point. And we also need to talk about the Reformation, because the Reformation kind of sets the stage for early modern philosophy, especially Descartes' radical doubt. And then we will say this. We have idealism and Kant. This is pretty much the standard sort of story, right? This is the standard story. So who are our important figures here? We have Socrates, highly important. Descartes is also going to be another big turning point. And I would say Nietzsche represents another big turning point. And Kant. If I had to rank them in order of importance for understanding the history of philosophy, I would say Socrates is obviously number one. I guess I would just rank them in chronological order because later philosophers reference earlier philosophers. Socrates is going to be sort of most foundational. Descartes is going to be next on the list because he's really the guy who ushers in. Well, I guess Augustine is going to be important too. So we'll say, I'm just going to make a note up here. We'll talk about major turning points. Thales, Socrates, Augustine, well, obviously Plato, Augustine, Descartes, Kant, Nietzsche. I'm feeling good about this. I can hang out on stream for a minute or two if anybody has any questions or want to get in the chat. You got about 2 minutes to do it. If I don't hear anything in the chat, I will log off in a couple minutes. I'm going to take Thales off because actually he didn't really leave behind much writing. Nominalism, the idea that universals are only names we give things. Occam, we can talk about Occam's razor. Scientific method, I believe the important guy there is Bacon, right? Francis Bacon. Copernicus gives us geocentrism, the Reformation, turn to the individual as locus of authority. Kant is kind of attempted to synthesize rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism focuses... I'll clean this up after the stream. But I think this is a pretty good skeleton here. It's a good skeleton. Thank you all for coming along on this ride. Not exactly sure when the next stream is going to be. It might be tomorrow. It might not be tomorrow. I'm just kind of I'm still settling into a schedule with this stuff. So I appreciate you all coming into the stream. Appreciate all of you in the chat. And you know, take care. If you aren't already subscribed, leave me a subscription. Click the bell for the notifications or whatever you're supposed to do. I am working on a proper video right now about how to study philosophy like a scholar. How to read philosophy books in a scholarly way. So that's what I'm working on right now. I don't know exactly when I'm going to be able to drop it. I hope to be able to drop it this week, but I am not exactly sure. As you can see, it does take quite a bit of research to do, and this is just one section of the video. This is supposed to be a 10-minute section of the video. I don't know. I don't know how I don't think I'm going to get through this in 10 minutes. But anyways, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast here, and I'll see you on the next stream.